Ready? Good morning, everybody. It's 10 o'clock. Can I welcome you all to this meeting of the Eastern Area Planning Committee, which is one of the three area-based committees of Dorset Council. For the benefit of the public, I'm Councillor Tony Kearns, Chairman of this committee. I would like to introduce our key officer support. We have Kim Cowell, who is our Principal Planning Officer, Laura Autry, our Legal Business Partner, and Megan Rochester, who is our Committee Support Officer. I will introduce the planning officers in advance of each application so that it's clear. I would also like to thank all the officers behind the scenes who are making today possible. I'm very pleased to welcome members of the public to our meeting, to listen to the debate and the decisions being made, and that they have the opportunity to address the committee directly in accordance with our procedures, which are on the Dorset Council website. Please be aware that the meeting is being live streamed and a copy of the recording of the meeting will be available afterwards. And by attending this meeting, you consent to being filmed. Please make sure that any mobile phones are switched off or turned to silent, and the same with sound on your laptops. Megan, do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Yes, so we've received apologies for absence from councillors Julie Robinson, Barry Gorringe and John Worth.
I think everyone else is here, which is fantastic. Members, are there any declarations of pecuniary or other conflict of interest, bias or predetermination on any of the applications before us today? If something does become apparent, please let us know as soon as you're aware. The minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of July have been circulated in advance and are published on the website. Are you happy for me to sign them as a correct record of this meeting? Thank you. Okay, can I remind members of the public, this is a meeting held in public and not a public meeting, and only those who have registered to speak will be allowed to address us. I won't go into the full detail as we only had one public speaker this morning. All requests have to have been registered for democratic services by 8:30 a.m. on Monday the 31st of July, and each speaker will be strictly limited to 3 minutes. We have 3 applications on the agenda before us today. Kim, have there been any requests for deferral or withdrawal, please?
Good morning, Madam Chairman, members. Kim Cowell, Eastern Area Manager. Yes, there's been one request for an application to be withdrawn, and that's agenda item 6 on page 13, and that's application PFUL 2023-00735. 17 King Street, Wimborne Minster. Thank you.
And that will come back to us at some point.
The application's been withdrawn, so the applicant would need to resubmit the application, and then that application would be considered on its merits. So it may need to go through the scheme of delegation as before.
Clarification. Okay, so the background information relating to the applications before us today have been available for inspection by members prior to the meeting, and that covers consultations, objections and representations, as well as the East Dorset and Purbeck local plans and the council's related policies. For each application, I will invite the case officer to introduce the item. The members of the public, planning agents, applicants, town and parish councils who have registered to speak will be allowed to address us. Following the public participation section, I will ask officers if there are any salient points that they wish to clarify. We'll then open up to members for questions and debate. And can I ask members, when you speak, can you please introduce yourself and say which ward you're from, please, so it's clear to the members of the public who are watching online. Can I also ask that you direct any remarks and questions through myself as chair, and I'll invite members to speak in turn. Please keep the microphones on mute and ensure that your device volume is set to 0 to maintain audio quality. Please use the desk microphone supplied and ensure you talk directly into the mic. At the end of the debate, I will take the vote by a show of hands. Voting detail will be recorded in the minutes if 3 or 4 members make the necessary request. So, as item 6 has been deferred, we will be moving straight on to item 7, which is Aylward Cottage, Aylward Devitt's Hill, Corfe Castle, and that's PVOC 2023-02149. Liz, you can take us through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members. My name is Elizabeth Adams, and I'm going to present this application at Aylwood Cottage to you this morning. This is an application for relief from a planning condition. In 1978, an application was approved at Aylwood Farm to extend an outbuilding and use it as a residential unit. And a condition was attached tying the residential use to the main farmhouse. So this application before you is for relief of that condition so that the unit can be used as an independent residential dwelling. The site is located within the Dorset AONB and is situated 3 kilometres away to the east of Cork Castle and 1.5 kilometres to the north of Harmons Cross. Now, Harmons Cross has a regular bus service to Swanage, Wareham, Poole and Dorchester and a rail link to Swanage. The cottage is currently used as holiday accommodation. So there's quite a lot of information on this slide, but basically an application since 1978 was received in 2007, and this sought relief from the condition in a similar manner to the current application. That application, excuse me, was refused because the proposal was considered to constitute development in the open countryside, and the applicant had provided no exceptional justification. So at the time, it was determined that it was contrary to countryside policy. Now, the current Purbeck local plan has since been adopted, and the policies LD and CO, so that's the development location policies, seek to locate dwellings in sustainable locations. But right now, unfortunately, Purbeck local plan area does not have a sufficient housing supply. We currently can only demonstrate a supply of deliverable sites of 1.23 years for the Purbeck area. And in the absence of a 5-year housing land supply, the policies LD and CO are considered to be out of date. So there's a presumption in favour of sustainable development unless there is a clear reason for refusing the development proposed due to harm to protected assets as set out in the NPF, or because the significant adverse impacts outweigh the benefits. This is the plan of Aylwood Cottage. So here's Aylwood Farm, which is the original building, and the cottage down here. They're both Grade 2 listed heritage assets. But the main considerations have been set out in the officer report: the principle of development, the impact on the character of the area and heritage assets, and the impact on neighbouring amenity. Here's some photos for you of the listed buildings, the main farmhouse building, and the cottage beside it. So here you see the cottage from both angles. The Conservation Officer has considered the application and advised that the formation of the independent residential unit following the removal of the condition would represent a breakup of the historic curtilage of Aylwood Farm. So this would result in some harm to the heritage asset. However, since 1979, when conversion of the building was originally approved, much of the historic fabric of the cottage has been lost, and the relationship with the building is less obvious, so the degree of harm arising from the current proposal is considered to be less than substantial. There's no requirement for any external changes to facilitate the proposed use as an independent dwelling. There's the existing elevations, which would remain the same. So no harm to the character of the area or the OMB is anticipated to arise from that. The floor space, it's only a 1-bed unit. It's modest at 48 square metres, but acceptable in terms of national space standards. The private usable outdoor provision is made that's available is again, it's small, but it's acceptable because the policy doesn't set out a minimum requirement. And here we've got 20 square metres, which is usable. That's considered to be acceptable. Due to the modest nature of the accommodation, no significant change to the intensity of the use of the building is anticipated compared to the lawful use as an annex. So again, we can't see that there'd be any harm to the character of the area or the OMB from the proposal. Off-road parking provision is currently available for vehicles to the rear of the cottage, and the condition is proposed to secure at least one of these to be associated with the cottage in the future. The Highway Authority has been consulted and has raised no objection to the removing of the condition. We appreciate that the lane serving the building is narrow but the proposal is not considered likely to result in a significant increase in traffic that would impact on highway safety. In relation to biodiversity, the proposal is within 5 kilometres of Dorset Heath and will be able to rely on the supplementary planning document mitigation, which will be secured via SIM. So in conclusion, although the principle of development would usually be considered unacceptable, in this case, we don't have a 5-year land supply, so the creation of a dwelling outside of the settlement has to be considered against the requirements of the NPPF at paragraph 11. In this case, there's no harm to the A and B that we've identified. We've identified less than substantial harm from the subdivision of the historic curtilage of the farmhouse, but this harm is not judged to outweigh the benefit of one additional house to the housing supply. We appreciate the site is in an isolated location, so future residents are likely to be dependent on private vehicles to access facilities. However, given the existing lawful use of the building as an annex, it's not judged that these adverse impacts of independent use would demonstrably outweigh, again, the benefits of securing an additional dwelling. For this reason, the recommendation is for approval, and I've just listed the 3 conditions there for you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Liz. We have one public speaker for this application on behalf of the applicant, and that's Gareth Kitchen. Good morning. If you'd like to come to the desk, you have 3 minutes from the time you start to speak.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to address the community. My name is Gareth Kitchen and I work for Blue Town Planning. I thank you to officers for their well-reasoned agreement to recommend approval. The Court Castle Parish Council have no objection to the proposal. The application in front of you today seeks relief of a planning condition that was applied in 1978, first storm to a residential unit, Aylwood Cottage. The 1978 conversion allowed for a residential unit. The wording was very specific. It wasn't an annex or an ancillary use. It was a residential unit. The conversion approved is entirely self-contained and completely separate from the main property, Aylwood Farm. It had its own kitchen, lounge, bedroom and bathroom, as shown on the approved plans. The planning conditions imposed stated that the residential unit should be used in association with Aylwood Farm. The reason for this condition was again very specific, said it was in the interest of visual amenity and road safety. And the building does not provide for parking or open amenity space. 25 years later, the circumstances have changed. The residential unit now has its own dedicated parking and open amenity space, in effect overcoming those previous concerns. Over that 45-year period, Aylwood Cottage has been occupied as an independent residential dwelling, and for the last 10 years at least, as a separate holiday cottage. There's more than sufficient evidence to demonstrate that the condition has been breached more than 10 years, and that the use is now lawful by the passage of time. However, the applicants have opted to be transparent and make this planning application. Members will note that the previous attempt to relieve the condition in 2007 was refused, noting the cottage at the time did not include parking or the open amenity space, which is now provided. So there's been a material change since that 2007 refusal. In terms of sustainability, the property is entirely self-contained, and anyone living there would require access to local shops and services. The requirement remains exactly the same whether the cottage was occupied in association with Aylwood Farm or occupied separately. The relief of condition does not create a new residential unit in an unsustainable location. In terms of the Conservation Officer's comments, no operational development is proposed, and Aylwood Cottage remains visually tied to Aylwood Farm, irrespective of its occupation. There is simply no breaking up of the curtilage or material harm to the setting of the listed building. In summary, the reasons the Council gave in 1978 for controlling the use, the lack of parking, the open amenity space, have been fully resolved. Respectfully, the wording of that condition is imprecise and almost unenforceable by today's standards. It is unnecessary and unreasonable, and that no longer has a valid planning purpose. Given the unique wording of that condition and the site circumstances, a relief of planning condition will not set a wider precedent across the further area. That's assists your understanding. Thank you for your time.
Very much. I'm going to go to officers now to see if there's any wish to comment on the speaker. I did fail to introduce Liz Adams properly to introduce the item, and Fiona McDonnell, who is the case officer, who has managed to get here. So is there anything you wish to respond to that's been said from the public speaker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only thing to say is that whilst officers appreciate what Mr. Kitching has said about the use of the building, we haven't actually had that evidence before us in order to consider it as part of this application in terms of its use over the past 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm now going to move on to the members of the committee. David Tookey, our first speaker.
Thank you, Chair. You talk about para 11D and PPF and talking about development. You also mentioned that there'd be another, it would add a dwelling to the number of available dwellings in the area. But it already exists. So it's not an extra dwelling. It's not development. It's just a change of a condition. So I'm a little confused as to how that all hangs together. So we've got something that isn't a new dwelling, it's already a dwelling. It's not further development. There is a condition applied that says it should be used in association with the farm. And I'm a little wary of overturning conditions that have been imposed by the planning authority. When I can't actually see where the reasons that are coming from, it's an extra dwelling, it's NPPF development. I don't see how that all fits together. If someone could help me with that, I'd be very appreciative.
Do you have a response to it, please?
Apologies. Elizabeth Adams. So the condition at the moment because it ties the building to the dwelling, it's in effect an annex and it is in effect one planning unit. Yeah. So the agent has spoken about how that condition has been ignored basically for the last 10 years and used as a holiday let. But until that's demonstrated through a certificate of lawfulness, in the planning officer's eyes, the lawful use would be as an annex and therefore one planning unit, and the removal of the condition would allow the formation of 2 lawful planning units. That's background. Thank you.
I think that's called semantics.
I would suggest that's angels dancing on the head of a pin, yes. But we were just told by the agent that it wasn't an annex. There seems to be scope here for a great deal of original thought or differences of policy. It seems a little difficult to say that either it's development, it's not development. Because it's development, NPPF says you should allow sustainable development. I'm less than convinced about this, I have to say. But I guess if the officers say that's the law, I'm going to go along with that.
I can understand the interpretation. Looking at the description of the 1978 planning permission, which was given to erect an extension to convert an outbuilding to previously be used for storage to residential use. That was then tied by condition to the parent. It made it in effect an annex to the dwelling. So we're banding about it in words, but in essence it's the same thing. So it was granted consent as residential use, but then it was tied by condition. And annexes are tied to the parent dwelling. They're not separate in their own right. This application, as Liz has explained, is to create its own planning unit. And that's when we consider paragraph 11, because we then have to apply the tests that are in the NPPF about would you grant a separate dwelling in this location. And then we have to take 5-year housing and supply into account. I can understand the terminology may confuse, but hopefully that is an explanation of how it sits within the legislative framework. Thank you.
I think also the officer said was that the applicant had two choices: either to go for certificate of lawful use and prove that it had been an independent dwelling for 10 years, or go this route and just to have that change of condition to regularise the situation. Either one of those two routes have ended up with the same answer, but they had two routes open to them, and this is the one that they've chosen. I'm going to move on to my next speaker now, and that's Alex Brenton.
Chair, Alex Brenton, Litchfield and Upton Board. I know this cottage, well, I don't know the cottage, I haven't been inside, but I've driven past it many a time on that narrow road. And I always assumed it was like an annex, it's where you put your son or something like that. It comes down to, in many ways, the comments that were put in by Councillor Brooks, is that if it has been used as a holiday cottage for 10 years without anybody objecting, why ask for a change of condition now? And as far as I can see, the only logical reason to do so is that if it's a separate building, then it could be sold separately. And we know that the cost of, well, the cost charged for cottages in Purbeck is very high. So that's a logical reason for doing it. My query is on this, because this is 10 years use as a holiday cottage without any objections. Have we actually asked all the neighbours? I know there's not a lot of neighbours, but there are neighbours. So how much information do we gather before we accept, oh, well, it's been used like that for 10 years? Because in some cases, we haven't been desperately thorough. So have we actually consulted the people in at the bottom end of Harmons Cross and Woolgaston as to how they see that cottage? Because I think that's relevant. That's a question. And because if there's no information in this 10-year rule, basically you do what you want for 10 years and then tell the officers it's fine, and we don't do anything about it. The other question, which is a question, is there is a barn at the back. You can see it in the top picture one, which obviously has sort of like garage doors on it. Is that part of the curtilage? Could that become an annex? I mean, I know we're not supposed to look forward, but I just wonder. And the other thing is the curtilage. Is the curtilage of cottage in picture 2 a separate curtilage? Does that mean that if we agree this, it becomes a separate building with its own curtilage? Because that's often an issue, you know, is it part of the main development or not? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Elizabeth Adams again. Councillor Brenton asked about whether we've consulted. So with this application, because it's a planning application and it's saying basically, will the removal of the condition be okay or not? We haven't needed to seek evidence of the 10-year use, because the 10-year use hasn't formed part of our assessment. Had the applicants wished to, they could have submitted a certificate of lawfulness with evidence that has been used as a holiday cottage for the 10 years. And in that case, we would then be seeking any information that neighbours wanted to give us if they wanted to say, yes, it has been, or no, it hasn't been. But in this case, because it's a planning application, we have done the usual, public consultation via site notice, and no comments have been received. So that's that question, I hope. In terms of the barn to the rear, it's within the residential curtilage of the farm, so it falls within that site, so it could be used for any ancillary residential use, so garaging or storage or anything that's related to the primary use of the farmhouse. And in terms of the curtilage, a curtilage is a funny concept because it's not a use. So for planning purposes, we don't have control in the same way as we would if there was a change of use of land. So ultimately, a curtilage is normally the land immediately adjacent to and serving the building. So from the plan submitted, if I just bring up the floor plan, you can see here that there appears to be pretty sort of natural curtilage incorporated in the community space, and probably a parking space, but that needs to be resolved by the owners of the land. So it's not something that we would impose as a condition, particularly because it's already land that's in residential use. And it's intended to be separate from the existing property.
If you just want to put up the conditions again, please. So you'll see that condition 2, let's talk about the parking. We're going to move on to our next speaker now, and that's Robin Cook.
Councillor Robin Cook, Stour and Ward. I can understand members' questions, Madam Chairman, but I think we are scratching around very much to find something to ask on this one. The cynically lead says that this has been used as a holiday let for 10 years, as we've read. I suspect that when it changes hands, it will still be a holiday let. So I don't think there'll be any change as far as the usage going forward. That's only my view. I can't see the harm. We're not looking at a new development. We're just looking at change, probably in ownership. The curtilage is not being enlarged. I can't see anything in that report which would make me say I don't agree with this. There is the option that there is a home being released for somebody. That comes into the weight of the argument, but I still think it'll be used as a holiday let by somebody else. So I'm happy to propose the recommendation as shown. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, my next speaker, do you wish to second the application?
Madam Chairman, yes, thank you. Yeah, I concur with the, sorry, Councillor Shane Bartlett, Ward and Warminster. Yeah, I concur with everything my colleague has said, Councillor Cook. I think if I had any disappointment around it, it would be the size of the living space, but that isn't a reason to actually refuse the application. I think that when you look through those consultees, that the parish councils hasn't objected to it, highways haven't objected to it, and I think there is obviously taking into consideration the lack of a 5-year plan supply that only 1.23 years of development land can be brought forward, and the officer report was excellent, and I think basically when you put it all together, there isn't really, I feel, any greater reasons for objecting to it, so I'm happy to support the proposals on the table and go with the officer recommendation additions later in the report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I do detect a sense of inevitability about this. I'll build right Swanage. I would just like to go back to what the elected local member actually said, because I think it's highly relevant. And she actually said the covenant was put on to ensure that a separate new dwelling was not permitted in a sensitive area. And I cannot see that these circumstances have changed. And I humbly agree with that. And I'm afraid that just as today we betray the covenants and the conditions that were put on an application yesterday, so the next step tomorrow will be the removal of the conditions that we put on today. That's the way it goes. The process is progressive and corrosive, and the loss ultimately, it's a very small loss, but with many others, because you can see the way things are regrettably going, the loss will be to the fundamental rural character of this part of Purbeck. Thank you.
Is there anything you wish to respond to that?
If I may, Madam Chairman, Kim Cowan. Thank you, Councillor Trout. We fully understand the comments that you put forward. The officer report sets out the material change in circumstances of the last 40 plus years. And as officers, our recommendations to you have to consider changes in legislation, national government advice and materiality. and the officer report sets those out. So I have nothing else to add to that. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no further speakers, so I'm now going to move to the vote. We have a proposal to grant that has been duly seconded. All those in favour, please, of grant. 4. Those against? 4. Okay. Just to make sure you confirm 4 each way. In that case, it comes down to the chairman's casting vote, and I will cast my vote as grant on this application. Thank you. Okay, we will move on to the next item, and that is PFUL 2023 01702, land at Sherford Drive, Wareham. And that this is a telecommunications cabin. And Liz, you're taking us through this one again? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Elizabeth Adams again. So the proposal before you is for a telecommunications broadband infrastructure in Wareham. The application site is located on the Northmoor estate, to the north of the historic part of Wareham. And the application site here is outlined in red. You can see it lies on land within the council ownership, and that's why the application is before you today. The application site is between Northmoor Way to the west and the Wareham bypass to the east. So the principle of the proposed development, principle of development to provide high-speed internet access to the settlement accords with policies SD and LD of the Purbeck local plan. However, the site is within an area designated as valued green amenity space in Northmoor Park by the Wareham neighbourhood plan. I apologise, it's a little bit fuzzy, but that's taken straight from the neighbourhood plan. And policy GS1 states that within these spaces shown here in green, development would be considered in line with national planning policy for Greenbelt. The proposals for a data exchange kiosk for telecommunications. It comprises a steel cabin on a concrete slab surrounded by 1.8 metre high timber feather edge perimeter fencing, 5 metres by 5 metres. So while this isn't Greenbelt, the Greenbelt tests are that development is inappropriate unless it meets one of the exceptions set out in the NPPF, and in this case, telecommunications equipment isn't included as an exception. So therefore, for the purposes of the neighbourhood plan policy, we have to consider whether the reasons advanced are sufficiently special to outweigh the harm arising. So here you see a picture of the cabin. It's of modest proportions and at 2.3 metres high. So about half a metre of it will be seen above the proposed close board fencing. The site is located opposite the junction with Sherford Drive that you see in this picture here. It's going to be set back from the road, adjacent to the high vegetation and away from the tree rooting area. So you see this tree here, they're bringing it further north, so this tree is about there. The proposal is functional in appearance, but the green colour will assist in mitigating the impact seen against the vegetation screen. And officers judge that if the timber fencing is finished in a dark finish and planting is secured around the external part of the compound, then no demonstrable harm to the character of the area will arise. And the proposal would accord with policy D of the Purbeck local plan. So you've got proposed condition 3 set out in your agenda would secure the colour, and condition 4 would require details of perimeter planting in advance of the building. As required by the neighbourhood plan policy GS1, officers have considered whether there are very special circumstances that outweigh the harm arising to the green space from the introduction of the development. So consideration has been given to the national planning policy paragraph 114, which advises that planning decisions should support the expansion of electronic communications networks, including full fibre broadband connections. Online research using various speed check websites suggests that speeds available on Northmoor are currently limited as no ultra-fast broadband is available. The proposal will allow the operators to introduce fibre to premises connections with ultra-fast broadband to the community. Alternative locations in this vicinity are limited as the green space protection is extensive. And it's your officer's judgment that the benefits of the higher download speeds for residents and businesses in the area does in this case represent a special circumstance to outweigh the harm. Before I conclude, just returning to this photo, the trees to the west here are subject to a tree preservation order. This tree here isn't, and it's far enough away from the proposal to avoid root damage, but it has been suggested that we should add another condition as condition 6 to prevent any parking or materials being stored in this area to avoid harm to the rooting of the tree. So that is another condition for your consideration. So in summary, the proposal will introduce development into the open space, which is contrary to the Wareham neighbourhood plan. But this is considered in this case to be justified by the associated benefits of the high-speed broadband for the community. The Town Council has raised no objections to the proposal. As the application has belatedly been advertised as departure from the development plan, of which the neighbourhood plan forms part, and the consultation period doesn't end until Friday, it's requested that members delegate the authority to determine the application to officers at the end of that period, i.e. it'll be the beginning of next week. And this would be provided that no new material considerations are raised by any new representations. So the recommendation is approval subject to the conditions listed here, set out in full in your agenda, and the proposed additional condition 6 to avoid harm to tree rooting. Madam Chair.
Thank you. We don't have any public speakers on this application, so I'm coming straight to members. Alex, you've indicated to speak first.
Thank you, Chair. Alex Branson, Bishop and Upton Ward, so I'm probably one of the nearest. This is a road I drive past all the time. I have friends on this estate, so I know the area well. I was surprised that there was room, but when I actually stopped and looked, there is sufficient room for this development without, completely removing the green verge there, which is used informally for picnics, football, things like that. But I think there is enough room. I was concerned to start with. My concern is about, because it's an area with a lot of young people and it's a leisure area, shall we say that, the issue of vandalism and security of fencing. Is it the sort of thing, it's not like an electric power station. They can't kill themselves if they climb in, but it could be graffitied and things like that. That's one question, is what measures are in place to prevent it being a source of children climbing all over it. The other one is, obviously you're going to need access by vehicles, even at the time of installation, and I don't know about afterwards. And I see the highways officer says that the area should be sort of controlled more, or actually draw the red line out and around, isn't it? I wondered if that had been taken on board. And what you wouldn't want there is a sort of a hard path to it for the access vehicles, because that will in the end be used as parking, because I would say parking is a hell of a problem in that area, but it can be an issue. So you wouldn't want it to become an informal car park, because that would mess up the green open space. So are there any measures in place to do that? Otherwise, not a problem.
Any questions there for you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Elizabeth Adams again. The question was raised about measures to prevent climbing and vandalism. These sort of compounds are common in urban areas. Obviously, the applicant Jurassic broadband wouldn't want damage. The form of the metal box style is quite secure. So intention is to put some planting around the outside of the fence, so that's hopefully deter those who would wish to stalk there. initials. In terms of access by vehicles, officers have resisted, as you say, any sort of formalised access to the building, the compound. It's obviously got very good accessibility along that road. There's plenty of room for somebody to park if they're there to do the maintenance. So officers have resisted any sort of suggestion that the red line should be expanded, because then, as you say, we're likely to get something formal that we just don't want in that green space. Thank you.
Okay, does that answer your questions? The next speaker is Shane Bartlett and then Mike Barron.
Madam Chairman, Councillor Shane Bartlett, Ward Member for Westminster. And it's in the report, it said that this telecommunications council also has power unit and air conditioning unit, but nothing in the report is anything at decibel level. So I'm just assuming from officers' experience, possibly dealing with other sites of this nature, that include that type of equipment within the cabin wouldn't be very aligned to nearby residential population. It does appear from the photos that are in the slides that the housing is a considerable distance away and probably get more noise from the road anyway.
With you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we agree with all those comments that you've made.
Wish to come back?
Just basically, Madam Chair, I think it's just a question that needs to be asked. I'm very pleased to see that the site is going to have planting around it, which I think is very welcome. I think, Madam Chairman, when you read through the report, again, another excellent report, and you look through it, that we talk long and hard within Dorset Council about full fibre broadband. It's been years ago, it was going on with the predecessor councils as well, and the need for broadband to be rolled out across the county. And that type of infrastructure to enable the residential population and business to have better infrastructure around that, and also to help the local Dorset economy. So I think I've read the report, Madam Chairman. I'm happy to proposing at this stage that we accept the application and the officer's suggestion to grant and the conditions laid out.
Thank you, and that's including the extra condition 6 as suggested today.
Yes, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Mike, you're my next speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Have we got any pictures, sketches, or anything to show us what it actually looks like, this thing? And the second thing is, what on earth is a footway 10 chamber?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're testing me now. Can I just check that for you? So the illustrations on the board now.
Yeah. Footway 10?
Sorry, sir. Madam Chair, through you, Elizabeth Adams again. My understanding basically is that it's a chamber which holds the cables.
Right.
I think that's a bit too technical, but does that answer your questions?
Sort of. Madam Chair.
David Took.
David Took, Cromwell Road Hold. Normally, I would place neighbourhood plan policies quite high. I think it's the whole point of doing a neighbourhood plan is for the local people. Go through referendum, go through go through section. And I would normally support neighbourhood plan proposals as a very important factor. Can I just confirm that in this case, the neighbourhood plan, they don't do this. However, that neighbourhood plan appears, I would guess, is the work of Wareham Town Council, and they themselves have no objection. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. In which case, if the local town council supports it, or at least doesn't object to it. I don't think I would object either. So I think I'd be inclined to support this proposal. Thank you.
Are you ready to second the proposal to grant?
Yes, with the condition as amended. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have no further speakers. It's been proposed for grant and seconded but also with delegation to officers for decision next week following the end of the public consultation period. Those in favour, please. I'll make that unanimous. So therefore the application is granted. Thank you for that. We're to the end of the agenda already, which must be a record for this committee. Item 9 are urgent items. There are none. Item 10 is exempt business. There is none. I just need to put you on notice, however, that the next meeting on the 13th of September is going to be a long meeting, and due to the number of potential applications coming forward, we have agreed to schedule an extra meeting in October, and you will surely receive a diary invitation for that for Wednesday, October the 11th. An extra meeting of the committee, otherwise we will be here till bedtime in September, and I think you do have lives outside of committee. So with that, thank you all very much for attending today, and the members of the public, and the meeting is now closed at 10:46. Thank you all very much.